April 15, 1943. 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Rolf Hermishen's smirk as he watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26 studied the American fighters, making their actual combat debut over occupied Europe. He transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling for altitude. "Their armies have sent us flying milk bottles." Below them, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to the sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for their massive bodies, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What Hermischen didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of derision into instruments of terror, their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, power concentrated enough to sever a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, understood what his men didn't yet know, that survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn performance, Republic aviation had created something unprecedented, a high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power, and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the French sky that morning were men who would become legends, future aces whose names would strike fear into Luftwaffe hearts. But on April 15, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting continuously since 1939, with veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days.
This story is about how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged into overwhelming superiority, and how German pilots' laughter turned to terror as they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. But industry didn't just produce aircraft. While the German pilot in 1944 entered combat with fewer than 100 flight hours, half of them on primitive trainers, his American counterpart had over 400 hours, including 75 on the P-47 itself. Americans trained against moving targets, studied gun camera footage from actual dogfights, and learned enemy tactics from detailed technical manuals. As Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, put it, "My first fight was fair, just not in the enemy's favor." The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Force. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined the possible. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo-supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question. This thing actually flies. Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where the air was too thin for conventional superchargers. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it.
The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early war fighters, or the cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lisieux, France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from 2nd Squadron JG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft.
The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluids sprayed into the cockpit, the engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried to bail out, but discovered the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from 2/JG-26, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this pilot, though several names have been proposed based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. Then the German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns. The cannon ammunition exhausted, the German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head, another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from 2nd Section of Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver, and survived. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, the 56th Fighter Group commander, had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a vertical dive. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bard Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The true revelation of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations, its range even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when employed properly.
Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17s with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Hinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-100s and 10s who survived, later recounted in a POW interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing." 8 Messerschmitt 100s and 10s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him." By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943, leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen. Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen, nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. An experienced pilot from the 61st Fighter Squadron, on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. His combat report was clinical. Open fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both eastern and western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reich Marshal Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach.
Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinrich Knocker of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. Major Gunther Rall, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly, the big American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Jabos, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet.
We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" According to a story that became legendary among the 9th Air Force, Major George Brooking's response became iconic. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hardstands for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock.
The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal, the largest small arms ammunition plant in the world, produced over 1.7 billion rounds of .50 caliber ammunition during the war, the majority destined for the wings of the Thunderbolt. This confluence of firepower and industrial scale was what truly defeated the Luftwaffe. It was not just a fighter. It was a logistics chain made manifest in a high-altitude slugger. Behind every aircraft flowed a river of fuel and ammunition. The 9th Air Force alone consumed 25 million gallons of aviation fuel per month, all shipped across the Atlantic on tankers built at the same relentless industrial pace. At plants like Lake City Arsenal, 30 million .50 caliber rounds were produced monthly, each machined to tolerances of 10,000ths of an inch to ensure flawless feeding during the most violent maneuvers. Even the ammunition was a weapon. The American incendiary round would pierce an aircraft's skin and detonate inside at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, while German cannon shells often exploded on impact, leaving the plane still flyable. The late war shift to ground attack showcased the P-47's unheralded toughness. Pilots learned to love the way the heavy radial engine absorbed damage. The twin-row 18-cylinder Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp radial, devoid of the delicate liquid-cooled radiators of a Messerschmitt or Mustang, could run on 5 or 6 cylinders if necessary. It became a giant metal shield for the pilot. How many pilots did the Thunderbolt bring home, flying on sheer will and a mangled engine? Thousands. This was the silent statistic that mattered most to the men flying them. One such man, Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, saw his career end in this very ground attack role. Gabreski, a master of the boom and zoom tactic he perfected in the P-47, was chasing a German training aircraft near a landing field on July 20, 1944. He pressed his attack too low. His propeller clipped the ground, mangling the blades. The vibration tore the engine from its mountings, and Gabreski was forced to crash land in enemy territory, captured by a German patrol almost immediately. Even grounded, the Thunderbolt found a way to stop its most successful pilot. His capture underscored a brutal truth. In the ground war, the risks were immediate, and the margin for error was non-existent. The real slaughter began during the decisive ground battles of the summer of 1944. Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy beachhead in late July, turned the P-47 into the primary instrument of the Allied advance. The Thunderbolts flew up to 7 missions a day, cycling back to rearm with bombs, rockets, and fresh ammunition. They became the eyes, ears, and iron fist of the advancing American armoured columns. The German response to the breakout was the desperate counterattack at Mortain, an attempt to cut the American lines. What met the German tanks was not the Luftwaffe, which was virtually non-existent in the daylight, but the concentrated power of the 9th Air Force's P-47s. The area around Mortain became a meat grinder. The P-47s found tanks exposed on roads, columns of motorized infantry attempting to move by day, and artillery pieces trying to set up.
Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Baron Sartz, flying a P-47D, described the scene. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. We had so much ordnance, so much firepower. We were hitting everything that moved, and if it didn't move, we hit it until it did.
or until it burned. The roads were choked with fire and wreckage. The Germans were simply paralyzed from the neck up by our air superiority. The climactic moment came at the Falaise Pocket, where two German armies were encircled. The P-47s owned the sky above the pocket, turning the German retreat into an apocalypse. The roads leading out of the pocket became known as the Corridor of Death. The Thunderbolts, dropping their bombs and rockets, then strafing with their 8.50 caliber guns, systematically annihilated everything attempting escape. Generalfeldmarschall Gunther von Kluge, commanding the German forces in the west at the time, reported to the High Command, "The front is completely porous. The attacks of the enemy fighter bombers, using bombs, rockets, and machine guns, are causing the heaviest, utterly unbearable losses. All movement is impossible." That phrase, "all movement is impossible," was the epitaph of the German army in France. It was a direct, irrefutable acknowledgement of the P-47's mastery of the battlefield. The Thunderbolt had stopped the mighty German military machine, not with a decisive air-to-air dogfight, but with a relentless rain of lead and high explosives against targets cowering in ditches. The ground attack numbers accumulated at a terrifying pace. By the end of the war in Europe, P-47 pilots had destroyed an estimated 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,800 armored fighting vehicles, and 60,000 assorted trucks. They had cut the arteries of the German war machine. The P-47 had transitioned completely from a high-altitude bomber escort into the ultimate tank buster and close air support platform.
Meanwhile, a variant of the Thunderbolt was conquering the vast expanse of the Pacific. The need for even greater range to escort B-29 superfortresses from newly captured islands to the Japanese mainland led to the creation of the P-47N. This wasn't merely a modification, it was a redesign. The N featured completely new wings with squared-off tips, allowing for internal fuel tanks, the so-called wet wings, holding an extra 200 gallons of gasoline. This boost, combined with drop tanks, extended the combat radius to over 1,000 miles, a capability that rivaled even the P-51D Mustang. The P-47N, arriving in the spring of 1945, was arguably the ultimate version of the Thunderbolt. It maintained the raw power and durability of its predecessors while adding the range and performance needed for the unique challenges of the Pacific. It flew escort missions to Japan itself, giving the B-29 crews confidence they could not have found otherwise. In the final, brutal days of the European War, the P-47's dominance had become absolute. The pilots of the legendary 56th Fighter Group, Hubert Zemke's Wolf Pack, transitioned from shooting down the best German aces to hunting anything that flew. Zemke himself, after a long and distinguished career commanding the group, was captured in late October 1944, when the tail section of his P-47 was ripped off by the violent prop wash of a P-51 he was trying to assist. The fact that an aerial accident, not an enemy engagement, took down one of their finest, speaks volumes about the level of control the Allies had achieved. Zemke, held in a German prison camp, watched from behind barbed wire as the P-47s continued to roar overhead, bombing and strafing. He heard the testimony of captured German officers and pilots. The feeling of invulnerability that had characterized the Luftwaffe in 1940 was now completely shattered. The laughter that Oberleutnant Hermiken had offered in 1943 had long since been replaced by a quiet, consuming terror. The final verdict on the P-47 was written not in American mission reports, but in the admissions of the German High Command. Post-war analysis and interviews with surviving Luftwaffe aces paint a picture of grudging respect, even admiration, for the American juggernaut. General Adolf Galland, the celebrated General der Jagdflieger and perhaps the most famous German fighter pilot of the war, offered a succinct, powerful summary. When asked about the P-47, he did not dwell on its early clumsiness. He focused on its effect. The Thunderbolt was the most decisive factor in the defeat of the Luftwaffe. Its toughness, its diving speed, and above all its massive firepower
simply changed the arithmetic of air combat. We could hit them, and they would come home. They would hit us, and we would explode. This wasn't a tactical critique. It was an obituary for an air force. Even Josef Pips Priller, the commander who once mocked the P-47 as meat for the slaughter, admitted in a classified 1945 interview, "The Thunderbolt is the finest fighter bomber ever built. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a true fighter when needed." But more than the machine, it's what it represents. Limitless American production. We lose one pilot, he's gone forever. They lose 10, they build 20. We laughed in 1943. Today, when we hear those machine guns, we know death has come calling. The destruction wasn't just physical. Germans nicknamed the P-47's machine guns Roosevelt's piano, a relentless mechanical staccato like the playing of a monstrous instrument. Pilots developed a condition known as Jabo fever, acute anxiety, racing pulse, even nausea, whenever warnings of fat American fighters came over the radio. Even ground troops learned, the moment you heard the Donnerschlag, the thunderclap, you ran to the nearest foxhole. Or didn't run at all. The final statistics of the P-47 Thunderbolt are staggering. 15,683 aircraft produced. 3,752 confirmed air-to-air victories. The P-47 accounted for 1,682 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed in the air and another 3,000 destroyed on the ground, making it the highest-scoring American fighter for combined air and ground kills. In its ground attack role, it released 132,482 tons of bombs and 63 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in the European theatre alone. A total of 5,223 Thunderbolts were lost to all causes: combat, operational, and accidents. A low rate given the volume of dangerous missions flown. These numbers confirm the story. The P-47 was a brute force solution to an elegant tactical problem. It was the product of American engineering genius, designed by Alexander Kartveli, a man who believed in power and mass over subtlety. It was initially despised by the fighter pilots who flew it, and laughed at by the enemy pilots who faced it. But its early flaws were mere detours on a path to dominance. Once the pilots learned to fight with the machine instead of against it, once they embraced the dive, the speed, and the sheer volume of lead, the P-47 became the instrument of the Luftwaffe's demise. The massive radial engine, the thick armour, the heavy fuselage, they all contributed to a simple, overwhelming outcome. The P-47 would withstand damage that would turn a Messerschmitt into confetti, and then it would deliver a burst of fire that guaranteed that the enemy pilot never saw home again. It was the ultimate, unforgiving lesson in attrition and firepower. The Thunderbolt, the Jug, the flying milk bottle. It was the plane that taught the Germans that the air war would not be won by the nimble few, but by the relentless, durable force of the many. It did not dance, it annihilated. It did not duel, it rained lead. And in doing so, it became the most feared machine in the skies of World War II, a true thunderclap of Allied power.